As the Eagles are trying to wind down the long goodbye tour, they just added more dates, taking them into March of 2024. So it'll be a little bit longer before the lights go out and the amps shut down for the final time. Now, before they throw the switch and end it all, I want to take a look back and remember how this all started. How fate, destiny, or whatever you want to call it, brought four young men from different parts of the country together to the city of Los Angeles, California. They all four came to LA with the same dream, to play and write music. Each one of them had a little help, or maybe a little push, to cause them to pack it up and head west. Bob Seger, Kenny Rogers, Gene Chalk, and even a father's job played a part in creating the band we know simply as Eagles. The four founding members, Glenn Frey, Don Henley, Randy Meisner, and Bernie Leadon, all have a different story on how they got there. But as I said, they all came for the same reason. So let's take a look back and remember the beginning. Multi-instrumentalist Bernie Leadon was the first to come west. Bernie's father, or should we say Bernie's father's job, played the pivotal role in his son's move from Minnesota to California. Although the move, which was to San Diego first in the early 60s, didn't last long, and the family then moved across country to Gainesville, Florida, following his father's job. It only took Bernie a few years in Florida to realize if he wanted to follow his dream of music, he would have to get back to California. So in 1967, after failing to try to talk a friend and fellow musician named Don Felder into going with him, a 20-year-old Bernie headed west alone, winding up in Los Angeles, California. Bass player Randy Meisner's band, The Dynamics, played a talent contest down in Denver, Colorado. He said, "We got something like third or fourth place, but we didn't win. So we all headed back home to Nebraska." 3 days later, there was this guy in a really nice car, a GTO or something, pulls up out front and said, "You want to go to California with us?" And I said, "Wow, yeah." This was the Soul Survivors band member, Gene Chalk. They had also played the contest. He had borrowed his mother's car and drove from Denver to Randy's home in Scottsbluff, Nebraska to try and convince him to quit his band and join their group, since the bass player they had didn't want to leave Colorado to go to California. Randy joined the Soul Survivors. They would play a few gigs around the Denver area to get some money together and then head to Los Angeles, where they changed the name of their band to The Poor. This was the summer of 1966, and Randy had made it to California. Drummer Don Henley from Gilmer, Texas, just east of Dallas, was playing in a group at the time called Felicity, soon to change their name to Shiloh. They caught a break. Kenny Rogers was looking for a group to produce and took the band out to Los Angeles in 1970 and let them live with him for about 4 months and helped them to record an album. Nothing good really happened for the band Shiloh, except it got Don Henley out to Los Angeles, and it was there he would meet Glenn Frey. Glenn came from Detroit, Michigan, where he had become close friends with Bob Seger. They would write songs and record music and party together. Bob was about 3 years older than Glenn and was always encouraging him in his career. Bob recognized Glenn's talent and was the one who encouraged him to step out on his own. So in 1968, Glenn Frey took his friend's advice and made the big move to Los Angeles. The music scene in LA around the time the boys started to filter in was thriving. Randy Meisner was the first to get there, Bernie next, followed by Glenn and then Don. People came from everywhere. Joni Mitchell and Neil Young were from Canada. Stephen Stills and J.D. Souther was from Texas. Graham Parsons was from Florida. Linda Ronstadt was from Tucson, Arizona, and on and on. They all made their way to L.A. where it was happening, many of them hanging out at a nightclub called the Troubadour. The Troubadour Club started as a coffee shop on La Cienega before moving to its current location at 9081 North Santa Monica Boulevard in West Hollywood. The word troubadour refers to a poet and musician singing tales of romance in 11th through 13th century France. Doug Weston founded the Troubadour in 1957 as a venue for folk artists and singer-songwriters to get together, socialize, and play their music. It was at the Troubadour that Don Henley would meet Glenn Frey. They had a few things in common besides the music, and being on the same small record label, soon became friends. Linda Ronstadt, who would play a big part in bringing the Eagles together, came out to L.A. in 1964 from Tucson, Arizona. She came out to sing with her friend Bob Kimmel, a singer and guitar player who also left Arizona to try to find a career in music in L.A. Soon after, they met bass player Kenny Edwards, who shared their musical tastes, and the three of them formed a group they called the Stone Ponies. The first of the soon-to-be Eagles to play in the Stone Ponies was Bernie Leadon. He did a fill-in on a short tour with Linda. This was some time before he joined the Flying Burrito Brothers in 1969, with whom he would be playing when Linda and her manager, John Boylan, needed to put together a band to back her up in 1971. The first one chosen was Don Henley. They heard him play at the Troubadour. Their next choice was Bernie Leadon, but he was playing with the Flying Burrito Brothers. So Don recommended Glenn Frey to play guitar. Randy Meisner was hired to play bass. He and Linda's manager, John Boylan, had known each other from Randy's playing with Ricky Nelson and from doing studio and sessions with him. So the band was in place, or so it seemed. Now there isn't a lot of information on how or why Bernie Leadon came on board. It isn't really said if he quit the Flying Burrito Brothers or what happened. But something changed his mind after being asked. There are a few different stories out there from the band members on the sequence of the hirings. I think maybe Bernie Leadon was the first on their list, but he may have had some other irons in the fire and it was just kept quiet for a time. But either way, these four guys were going to put together a band for Linda and start rehearsing for the first time. During the first few days of playing together, Linda Ronstadt said, their voices were amazing. They had that perfect blend. You could tell there was something there. During the tour with Linda, Don and Glenn became close friends and talked about keeping the band together after the tour. Once it was talked about between all four members and the decision was made, they told Linda that after the tour was over, they were going to stick together and see about getting a record deal for themselves. Linda said she totally understood and wished them the best. The Eagles were signed in 1971 to Asylum Records, a new label started by David Geffen, who was introduced to Glenn Frey by Jackson Browne. The four founding members of the Eagles were to record 4 albums together before multi-instrumentalist Bernie Leadon was to finally walk out and quit the group. The songs from those albums were to make up one of the greatest hits album ever put together. Released by Asylum Records on February 17, 1976, the album titled Eagles, Their Greatest Hits, reached number 1, where it stayed for 5 weeks. According to the Record Industry Associations of America, their greatest hits, 1971 through 75, has been certified platinum 38 times. That's 38 million copies sold, and has become officially the biggest selling album ever in the United States. So where are those 4 founding members now? Bernie Leadon left the group in 1975. Of course, that was not the end of the Eagles, but I do believe it was the end of that sound that started it all. Bernie is 76 years old now. Last I heard, Bernie was living on his farm just outside of Nashville, Tennessee, and was happy. He still writes songs, plays and records music, and might even do another album someday. You can look up his music on Spotify. Bernie said if he regretted one thing, it was pouring that beer over Glenn's head in a fit of anger when he left the group. He said he got in touch with Glenn years later and apologized for it, and Glenn graciously accepted his apology. In 2013, he was asked to join back up with the Eagles and do the History of the Eagles tour. When the tour ended, he was asked if he'd ever play with them again. This is what he had to say. Well, never say never, right? Interestingly, when this tour was over and at the last show, Glenn gave me a big hug and said, "It's not over." And I went, okay, cool, man, let's talk about it. Now, Glenn's not here, so it probably won't happen, unless maybe it's just a one-time thing or a special event. I myself always believed Bernie's playing and vocals were a huge part of that early Eagles sound. And if you're a fan of Bernie's, I did a video on him a while back. I'll put a link up right here to it. You can find out a lot more about him and hear his story there. Glenn Frey passed away on January 18, 2016 at the age of 67 from complications of rheumatoid arthritis, acute ulcerative colitis, and pneumonia. He was considered the leader of the group in the beginning and played a big part of getting them signed to Asylum Records. He was a singer, songwriter, guitar and piano player, actor, and a painter. Randy Meisner, the bass player, with one of the most beautiful voices ever, just passed away in July of 2023 from COPD. He will always be known for his lead vocals and that incredible high note he hit on the live version of Take It to the Limit. Randy was to quit the Eagles in September of 1977. His singing, songwriting, and harmony was so important to the early Eagles sound. If you're a big fan of Randy's, here's a link to a video of his on my channel. Don Henley has kept the Eagles going after the passing of Glenn Frey. He started out playing drums and singing harmony early on, but ended up singing the lead vocals more as time went on. Out of the 5 #1 singles that the Eagles produced in their career, Don Henley was the lead vocalist on 3 of them. He is the last of the founding members to be with the band, and it looks like he will be the only one there of the founding members on this final long goodbye tour. Of course, unless we get a surprise visit from Bernie Leadon. I have a video on Don also, and more information about him. Here's the link to it. So when these last 5 Eagles, Don Henley, Joe Walsh, Timothy Schmidt, Deacon Frey, and Vince Gill bring the Eagles to the end of the road, it's always good to look back and see how fate and destiny brought those first 4 together and started it all. If you have any Eagle stories you want to share, especially concerts you've seen from the early years, feel free to leave them in the comments section. I'll leave a few more Eagle members' videos right here that I have on the channel. Someday soon, I hope to add Glenn Frey and Timothy Schmidt to this list. I hope you enjoyed this look back on the beginning. If you did, please give it a like and share. Stick around and watch a few more videos, and make sure you subscribe before you leave. Thanks for watching. I appreciate it.